Again at WorldView, the #1 media company. This is where we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our own perspectives and worldview. Today, we're going to discuss a topic that everybody around the world seems to be talking about. It's very hard not to take a stance. You know, the Queen Elizabeth II of the UK, of British Queen rather, has died, and people are either celebrating her or mourning her. Some are people, standing stances that seem to be saying, let's wait to see what the world is saying first before we give our view. But here today with us, we have 4 gentlemen who have views on whether or not her death is to be celebrated or to be mourned. First, we have Mr. Carl Niehaus. Carl has been ambassador of South Africa in the Netherlands. He's been spokesperson to Nelson Mandela, former President Nelson Mandela. He's also been spokesperson to a faction of the African National Congress under Jacob Zuma. And he has views on these things. Carl, welcome.
Thank you. No faction. When I was spokesperson for President Jacob Zuma, he was president of the ANC, so I was spokesperson of the ANC.
Okay, you do know that I like to push you a little bit, right?
And you know that I will always reply, Solly.
I know that. That's why I do it. And then we have Phil Craig. Phil Craig came all the way from he was born in the UK. He's lived in South Africa for quite a while now. You came all the way to South Africa and formed a Cape Independence Advisory Council?
Well, there were a few steps in between. So I certainly didn't come to South Africa for Cape Independence. Unfortunately, when I came, South Africa was on the up and up, and it was 10 rand to the UK pound. The economy was growing, and unemployment was falling, and things were looking rather rosy. And then Jacob Zuma came to power, and then we formed Cape Independence.
I almost said, and things fell apart, but they haven't really have that. So that's a discussion for another day. Our fourth guest this morning is Roman Cabanac. Roman is very well known. He has his very own show, The Money Show, which is doing really, really well in South Africa, very well followed. And you also came from France, didn't you? At some point, you lived in France.
Yes. Morning, Solly. Yes. No, I was born in France, but moved here when I was rather young. And I have been here ever since. I detest Europe. I like visiting it, but living there is an absolute nightmare. So I'd rather stick around here. It's much more fun.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, I live in Switzerland. They always say it's not Europe, it's Switzerland. It's tense apart. But there's a whole big discussion now about what it means to be neutral. What was neutrality of Switzerland? There was a big report that came out in November 1991 to look at whether or not the concept of neutrality needed to be redefined. And after lots of discussions, the report came out. Everybody said, "Yeah, we're fine with it." Now it's come up again in the current context with the military, the war in Ukraine. Now Swiss are saying, should we be neutral? Should we remain neutral? What does it mean in 2022 to be neutral? It's still going ahead, but most people in the leadership, national leadership, seem to be saying, well, we had this discussion in 1991 and we were all happy with it. Nothing has changed much. Actually, the way it's defined, it gives us enough room for maneuver, when things happen around the world. That's quite interesting. That's also a discussion for another day.
Indeed. Today, I think I'll be the Switzerland of this particular topic because I'm fairly ambivalent on the Queen, whereas I believe Mr. Niehaus and Mr. Craig have very strong views about the Queen. So do I, but not in ways people might believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So who the person who's not here today with us is Seppo Matseba, load shedding again, ladies and gentlemen. Seppo is an amazing contributor to these discussions, but there's so much we can do when we're load shedding. Seppo is not able to do this because it's load shedding. On that note, welcome. Thank you very much. Let's get on. We're going to start with Carl. Carl, we agreed I can just call you Carl, right?
Of course.
Carl, what do you think? I mean, were you a royalist? Were you attached to the Queen and the idea of the Queen of the UK or the Queen of what do you call the Commonwealth?
Solly, you know that I come from Afrikaner stock, and my Afrikaner family had been at the receiving end of British imperialism. Of course, the Afrikaners are descendants of the Dutch and also colonists. So there was these two wars, the so-called liberation wars between the British colonists and the Afrikaner/Dutch colonists. But the reality is that the Afrikaner community had hardly no love for the British royal family. I can tell you that one of the reasons why in 1948 the National Party, that racist, terrible National Party, came into power in South Africa was because of what happened in 1947, when the old United Party under the then Prime Minister General Jan Smuts had the royal family for a grand tour to South Africa for 2 months and spent literally millions of British pounds on building a railway line from Cape Town right up to Rhodesia to give the royals a grand tour of Southern Africa. And the Afrikaners could not stomach it. That was one of the reasons why the National Party won the 1948 elections. But of course, the main reason why I am so strongly opposed to the British monarchy and the British Empire is what British colonialism had done to South Africa and many other colonies. The exploitation, the extraction of literally billions of British pounds from these countries, our minerals, our diamonds, our gold, the manner in which the British were part of the suppression of the indigenous African people, the loss of the land, and the severe and violent repression of the indigenous people, not just of South Africa, but of many other countries in Africa and throughout the world. Before you silence me, because I know I've got a tendency to keep on talking, but let me tell you a story of Cecil John Rhodes, who was one of the great enforcers of the British Empire, who loved the British Empire, was going to build a road from Cape to Cairo. He moved into the old Rhodesia, drove the African people off the land, especially in those areas where the minerals had to be mined, and then employed a private military company to kill literally thousands of people in Rhodesia. And one of the things that happened was that the submachine gun, which was a new weapon, was being tested in Rhodesia by Cecil John Rhodes with the assistance of the British Empire. And the British Queen is the personification. She is the incarnation of this British Empire. And even today, although we are told that the empire has changed, yes, it has changed, it has gone transformation, but it has not disappeared.
Okay.
London and the London Stock Exchange still continue to exert an extraordinary amount of influence and exploitation in South Africa. Let me stop there.
Okay. Does it mean that you are her death is not to be celebrated or to be mourned?
Well, I think every human being, one must show some respect for that person that passed on. I'm not a callous person, but at the same time, I don't think one can uncritically sing the praises of Queen Elizabeth II or of the British Empire or of the royal family.
Right.
And that is where I differ from those who have issued statements of praise of her and of the royal family. I distance myself from that unequivocally.
Thank you. Phil, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. Look, I should first of all say, obviously, I'm appearing today in my personal capacity,
Okay.
and as someone who was born and raised for most of, or the early part of my life in the UK. I came to South Africa in my 30s. So, look, first of all, for me, I think it's slightly inappropriate to associate the Queen with colonization. They're two distinctly different things, and I think one of the key features of this Queen's reign has been the independence and the rolling back of the British Empire and the granting of independence. And actually, if anything is synonymous with this Queen, has been this changing era. And under the current Queen, the British policy has been unequivocally throughout the world that the people who live in a particular region should be able to make decisions for themselves. And the British government has time and time again respected that position wherever it's been, and where African countries have wanted their independence, and understandably so, then they've been granted that. So I think it probably is disingenuous to start rolling back time, and I think that's a bit of a problem that's specific in South Africa, where we think it's appropriate to start rolling back the clock and applying today's moral standards about things that happened in an era where might was right, and that was the order of the day wherever you lived. So, and I think this particular queen, so my feeling, it was an interesting title, do you celebrate or mourn the queen? Well, I celebrate, but not her passing, but her life. I think she's been an absolutely amazing monarch. I think she's been an inspiration to the British people and people throughout the world. I think she's conducted herself with an incredible amount of dignity in an era that has been quite difficult for her, I'm sure. And I think her contribution has been immense, and she is really loved by the British people, the vast majority of them. But she's also deeply loved by people around the world, and she's carved out this kind of, which is bizarre in some ways, given Carl's this slightly moral decency about her. And for me, it's. But I mean, she was 96. She was going to pass. It's the end of an era, so it's hard to get too distressed about somebody who's come to the end of it. But look back and say the longest reigning monarch of all time in the UK, who really has been really been quite inspirational in what she's done. I think it's obviously there's a sadness, but there was an inevitability about it, and I'm delighted to have been born under her reign. And I think she'll be a hard act to follow.
Thank you. There you have it. Yeah. Roman, what do you think?
So as I said from the beginning, I'm a bit ambivalent. I think the character and the power of the Queen is overblown to a large degree. She's not the CEO of Great Britain, right? She has no leading efficient role within the government. It's largely dignity-based and largely symbolic. For the most part, under the Queen, colonization was ended. Well, it happened before she arrived, but during her period of time, it continued rapidly. And more importantly, colonization was not particular or unique to Great Britain. Every single country with power has done it. If they don't have resources at home, they go elsewhere to find them. But if you are places like the United States or Russia or China, you exploit your local people for those resources. That's one of the consequences of the Industrial Revolution. You need resources to become powerful, and you go where you can find them. In terms of particularly colonization, Britain was, if I may say, one of the more meeker versions of it, because they believed, and most of the European powers believed, colonization would go on for 200-300 years. So they kept the minimum viable amount of people in those colonies, because why put in all the resources now where we will get the consequences of colonization in 200-300 years? World War II ended that, of course. But for the Queen herself, she led with dignity. She was a deep Christian, which I think is very important. But her legacy is a bit mixed. I think Britain now is poorer under her reign, or during the course of her reign. And it's really a question of her capabilities to do anything. The monarchy has been so neutered in Great Britain that it ceases to have a real function. And I think that is the main problem with it. She did her best. She probably is the best monarch Britain has ever had. But the concept of the monarchy is so neutered and weakened that it is always, and always will be, symbolic, which is the greater problem.
But then, I mean, you're saying it's poorer. How much richer would it be had she had slightly more power? And also, and to all of you, if the royal family placed no part in politics, would it have been the originator of the decolonization project, or was just an observer?
Solly, perhaps I can come in. First of all, I disagree that colonization has come to an end. We've got a new colonial era, and the United Kingdom and Britain continues to play a central role in that new colonial era. We continue to see the dominance of countries such as Britain and other Western European and imperialist nations over the people of Africa. We continue to see the extraction of our scarce resources and minerals, and we continue to see the African people and people in the developing world getting the short end of the stick. The power dynamics have been ameliorated, have been adjusted, but they have not fundamentally changed. And where I would disagree with Roman is about the role of the Queen. The royal family, yes, has a symbolic value, but they play a central role in what characterizes the British nation and characterizes the manner in which the Brits have operated throughout the world. I have not heard Queen Elizabeth II ever apologizing for colonialism, nor apologized for any of the atrocities that are associated with colonial rule. And I would seriously dispute whether it is true that the Brits were giving us a mild and more benevolent form of colonialism. You can talk to the people of Kenya, the people of Rhodesia, the great nation of India, and they will tell you how they suffered severely under British colonial rule, both physical oppression, but at the same time, massive economic exploitation. You know, some of the figures that are being bandied around at the moment is that in the vicinity of 145 trillion British pounds had been extracted from India during colonial rule. Something similar with regards to South Africa, and we can go on and on.
Okay.
The wealth of the United Kingdom is built on colonialism and the exploitation and extraction of that country from the nations that it's colonized. And that is where the reality remains. I see Roman is shaking his head. I don't know if he wants to come in and disagree about that very basic fact.
Yeah, I need Roman to come back and express his views, but also, Roman, if you can just tell us how you think the UK is slightly less rich or less wealthy because of the neutralization of the royal family.
So I'm not saying the UK is less wealthy, but it's an economic hub for technocrats, right? After World War II, it basically became a colony of the global American empire, and the Queen could not stop it. So now you have, I know Phil will love that term, but after World War II, I mean, the Americans are deemed to be the saviors of Europe, even though it was the Soviet Union,
right.
And the Americans at least managed to galvanize quite a bit of influence over Western European politics since then. And now there's a deep relationship between the Brits and the Americans. And now the British are basically, to me at least, they are no longer a sovereign country in terms of what they do, irrespective of Brexit. They're just an offshoot of the global American empire and basically generate American interests within that country for itself. And the Queen is unable to stop that due to her lack of power. But whereas if she had power, hopefully she would have kept Britain.
So Britain has become a satellite of America in some way.
Absolutely. In terms of culture, in terms of economic values, and especially in terms of war.
Of course, I have to jump in here.
Please do.
So look, first of all, just some, just for in case people don't know. So the authority of the Queen. So in theory, the British Queen, or the British monarch now, obviously it's a king now, has absolute authority. So any law that is passed in Parliament has to be signed off by the Queen or the King. And if the monarch doesn't sign it off, then the law doesn't take place, and this is called royal assent. And the last time the monarch didn't sign what Parliament wanted was in 1707. So effectively, the British royal family is ceremonial. Whilst in the letter of the law it has power, it never executes it. And if it were to ever execute that power, it would end instantly. The British people absolutely love the royal family, but they absolutely don't want a monarchy. And the day that any monarch exercised that power, it wouldn't even take place. Parliament would instantly override the authority of the monarchy, and Britain would be a republic by the end of the week, or whatever process went on from there. So we love the royal family because they're an institution, and they bring these values which are phenomenal. When it comes to look at, first of all, comments on the war, might I just point out that the Americans didn't join the war for 2 years, and that Britain, ironically, with the help of South Africa and Australia and New Zealand and Canada, pretty well fought a rearguard action for a couple of years until America decided to join the war. But yeah, that's an aside. And I think this notion, ironically, people just don't understand the British psyche. And I'm proudly South African, but I'm proudly British. I have a foot in both camps. And they don't understand. The one thing the British people have done phenomenally well is that in many ways the British people, unlike well, maybe not unlike, is they have a real sense of what's right, and they just make decisions. And when the British government steps out of line, it's brought back in line by the British people. So yeah, it wasn't the British government that didn't want to go into the euro. It was the British people. It wasn't the British government that wanted to come out of Brexit. It was the British people. And actually, not even the British government can override the common sense of the British people. And if anyone thinks that the Americans do that, they really don't understand the British people. Obviously, we're living in a global community, and one of the things that Britain has done phenomenally well, whilst of course it's not without problems, is there's a real sense of Britishness and British pride, which embraces people of all races and languages and religions. And one thing that Britain can be really proud of is the degree that people come to that country and then take on Britishness. And I think probably what the royal family are is this manifestation of and in that point I agree with Carl, although not the implications, that manifestation of Britishness, a certain kind of dignity and a little bit of a stride, or but yeah, perhaps people call it arrogance, and perhaps that's there. But yeah, for me, that's what I grew up with, and I think the sort of that's how I experienced Queen. That's how I experienced monarchy, and I think it's exactly where it should be. This ceremonial figurehead that kind of is a balancing effect on political forces, a moral voice in the country, but with no power, because ultimately Britain is a democracy, and Parliament reigns, not the monarchy.
Yeah, well, the concept of power of the royal family is quite interesting, because I lived in Canada a number of years ago, and there was a political conflict. The parties couldn't agree on forming a minority federal government. And, as you know, Canada is part of the world, the Commonwealth. They have a prime minister, like in most Commonwealth countries traditionally. And you have what you call the Governor General, who is in effect the representative of the Queen in those countries. So the dispute in Canada almost went to the point where they had to let the Governor General appoint an acting prime minister, because the acting political parties couldn't. So it didn't get there because there are so many checks and balances before it gets there. But the point is, it was already being spoken about that, look, if you guys can't get your act in order, we have to get the Governor General, who is the representative of the Queen who is also the head of state, in effect, of Canada, because the Prime Minister is head of government. So those powers do exist. The royal family or the monarchy has a stick, but that stick has got to be used really, really, really after many jumps over several checks and balances, I think.
If I can summarize that up, it has to be used when the people ask for it to be used.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But sorry, what I would disagree with, just this small point, is that the royal family does not have any power. They have immense power as an expression of the character of the British people. And that power, I wouldn't say is one that is decent. I think it's just extremely arrogant. I've been at the receiving end of seeing that arrogance. I was at close proximity to the husband of Queen Elizabeth, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, where I was standing at the fort in Cape Town and watching part of a march by the Cape Corps. And he turned towards Warren Clelo, who was standing next to him, and he said, well, these coons could never march, eh? The racism that is enshrined inside that family, if you also listen to an interview recently from Prince Harry and how Meghan is being treated, is something which we cannot just deny. And that racism was underlying to the whole attitude of colonial rule by the British over the peoples of the colonized countries throughout the world.
Yeah, but Carl, I mean, individuals say things. The late, Queen's consort used to say things. I mean, everybody knew he was a bit of, he was a bit, how to say, clumsy at some point with words. He'd say things that other people wouldn't say. But does it mean that everything he said, even in banter, was a representative of the sentiments of everyone in the monarchy? Would you say that, really?
Well, it's extraordinary that one wants to come up with excuses for someone like Prince Philip and his overt, not even covert racism. and the racism that is enshrined in the behavior of the British Empire, and what we see also even playing itself out inside the British royal family. I repeat again, go and listen to that interview from Prince Harry. It is hair-raising.
Okay. Look, what is the passing of Queen Elizabeth II going to do? I mean, the world generally agrees that there was an era called colonialism which ended. Now, Carl says, no, it has not ended. We should also be talking about the benefits. I mean, have not been benefits of the relationship, of the coming together of all these, the East, the West, Africa, maybe too much to the detriment of Africa in many instances. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the things that exist in many of these countries that have been colonized that can be used to benefit further growth in those countries.
Well, I'm certainly not going to sound like Helen Ziller to say that there were good things and benefits from colonialism. Please, can we stay away from that? Because
no.
I hope that is not what you mean, Solly.
No. What I mean is to have a robust conversation. So let's have a conversation. This is what this platform is about. Roman, what do you think?
So, I mean, the benefits, I suppose, the Commonwealth Games, they're quite nice every once in a while to have a few athletes go over. But interestingly, Carl, I fundamentally disagree with you about the racist nature of the royal family and the royal government at the time, because when decolonization was happening across Africa, the Brits said to their colonies, you can have majority rule as long as there's equal suffrage, right? As long as black people, the majority in those countries, can vote. So it happened in Ghana, but in Rhodesia, they said, no, we don't want the majority to vote in Rhodesia. So Rhodesia actually extricated themselves from the Commonwealth and became a unilaterally independent nation. They broke the rules of what the British told them. And Ian Smith did this unilaterally in 1965 under the auspices of not wanting majority rule. So how can you say that one is racist because maybe one said a word or two or three? But on the other hand, the British understanding that when decolonization was happening, that it needed to be done under majority rule, under universal suffrage. So there's
well, that was going to work for the British and for the British Empire in order to be able to move into this new colonial era. It had nothing to do with being anti-racist. If Queen Elizabeth was truly anti-racist, I would have wanted an apology from her to the people of South Africa for the racism that was first and foremost also managed and implemented by the British Empire in South Africa. Apartheid and racism did not start in 1948 under the old Nationalist Party government. It was well and alive under the British Empire. Go and ask the people of India whether they think that the British were not racist. They were. And the racism that we continue to see, as I've emphasized now to you, within the British royal family is an expression of what continues to happen in the exploitation of the majority of Black and especially African people here in Africa and people from the developing nations throughout the world, of which Britain, of course, quite correctly, together with the United States of America, are the main proponents.
But, you know, I hear that, I mean, I've spoken to people who get involved in some of these multilateral negotiations on behalf of African states with the outside world, China, with the West, etc. And some of these people, a gentleman wrote a paper to say the problem with Africa, and we're talking post-colonial Africa, is the power that is given to the heads of state, to the president, some of whom, you know, have been there for years. They keep changing constitutions to remain in power. These are the guys who sign the deals with the other guys. So the technicians who was there to put together the clauses to eventually be able to take a document to the head of state or head of government to sign, they get told, listen, that clause over there, our friends don't like it, take it out. And that clause could be the one that defines whether or not there's power or there's weakness on the part of the African state being represented. So African heads of state, Africa has to take responsibility for some of the things that have happened in Africa, to Africa, that continue to happen since the early years. We can't constantly be blaming Queen Elizabeth and the West and the Americans. We're responsible for
but we can say that there is an insidious relationship
No, but it
between some
benefits
of
people.
those
No,
African heads of state and those governments.
Yeah, but those
We know
African heads
very
of states
well
have
what
given.
the levels of corruption are, and we know how those governments are influencing those heads of state.
Yeah,
I
and that's
agree
bad.
with you
And that's
that
it's a
the
big
heads
thing.
of state in Africa are failing their people, but they're failing their people in cahoots with these imperialist and new colonial powers that cooperate with them, and of whom they are the agents, and in fact are the people who are implementing those programs by those colonial and new colonial powers. We see that in the rest of Africa, and today we see it in South Africa. We currently have a president who is an agent of new colonial power and of white monopoly capitalism. So he is very similar to those other African heads of state that you refer to.
Okay. Any views from the other channel?
Yeah, please let me jump in, and I think I'm going to give Colin an aneurysm and tell him that the three most inspirational leaders that I've served under in various parts of the world are Her Majesty the Queen, Margaret Thatcher, and Helen Ziller. And if Solly isn't going to get in bed with Helen Ziller and say her comments on her comments on colonization
well, I don't easily get an aneurysm, but I do disagree with you totally.
But the truth is that everybody knows it. And actually, the best thing is never to listen to political leaders. Don't listen to me or you or the leaders. What do people do with their feet? And you see that the more a country was developed under colonization, the more ordinary African people are actually suffering the nonsense for the likes of the people that you've worked for. Move towards where colonization last was, because actually that's where the quality of life is best. And actually, yes, there were wrongs. Well, that's the fact. You can't argue the fact. And colonization, yes, had.
I will most definitely argue it, because it's not a fact.
And everything in life is nuanced, but actually there were definite gains, and you can see it. Ordinary people of all colors and races understand it. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, it's very interesting that you bring up this context of neocolonization. Now, the United Nations described neocolonization in 2018 in a report from its Human Rights Committee. And its description was this: a state using the letter of the law to impose its will in defiance of a higher moral law, to impose its will on a weaker party against theirs. And they describe that as neo-colonialism, which, and actually in the context of my cause, Cape Independence, is exactly what your party is doing on the people of the Western Cape. For 30 years, we've never voted for you. The majority of people in the Western Cape have never voted for this. We don't want to be governed by you. And actually, at this point in time, in the midst of a chronic crime problem, the Western Cape people, the Premier of the province, the Mayor of Cape Town, backed by the people of the province who elected him on that ticket, is pleading with your party for control of policing so they can stop themselves getting murdered. And you're saying no. And that is neo-colonialism. And you talk about people getting their democratic will. Are you going to allow the people of the Western Cape to have their democratic will? Are you going to allow them to have a referendum and decide if they want to be part of South Africa and if they want to continue as part of this horse and pony show that your party's been so responsible for?
Okay.
I must respond to that. I'm insisting to respond to that.
I promise you.
And you will give me a chance to respond to that, because that is a load of poppycock.
So I also want to respond to my question as well.
Roman, please go ahead.
Yeah. So Cole, I think you do understand that there's a benefit to colonialism, because your party has ruled over South Africa, which is a construct of the British Empire, and you have done so for 30 years without any anticipation or any intent to break it up as it was before the British arrived. So under those auspices, there is a benefit to colonialism, because the ANC have taken something colonialism has created and have ruled it for 30 years. So how do you square that peg?
Roman, we got a United Union of South Africa, which the African National Congress, as the people of South Africa, inherited. I am not saying that we should have broken that up. That would have been untenable, and it would not have been possible. But at the same time, the fact that we got this unity under British colonialism does not mean that that colonial rule was benevolent, was good, and did not exploit the majority of people in this country. You
No,
see,
certainly.
you are making, you are putting two things together and you're trying to justify them while there is a fundamental issue here. Yes, there is now a united South Africa, but let us not deny that it is the British colonial rule that to a very large extent caused the damage and the suffering and the exploitation of the people of South Africa. The African National Congress has been attempting to ameliorate that, to address it. Under difficult circumstances, and sorry you may laugh, but it is true, it has failed in many ways, but Phil, I can assure you there is not going to be a breaking up of the Union of South Africa and the Republic of South Africa. We are not going to allow the Western Cape to drift off under a racist democratic alliance, which is not taking care of the majority of Black people in the Western Cape. And your definition of colonialism is indeed a very selective one. I will add to that colonialism in its essence is, and new colonialism is the economic power to exploit and continue to exploit the majority of people and subjugate them to a construction that was originating from colonialism. And that is exactly what we see in South Africa.
Well,
and currently we have white monopoly capitalism in control of this country, which is the consequence of colonialism. Roman, are you hyperventilating?
Not in the slightest, but what you're describing is ANC rule for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Oppressing, subjugating people for your own benefit under the auspices of the colonial borders of South Africa. It's exactly what you are doing, not personally, but the party you represent.
That's not what I'm describing.
Okay.
I'm describing
Only
to you
because you were
the
voted in,
continuation
that's
of
the
white
fundamentals.
monopoly capitalism since 1994 and the failure of my party, the African National Congress, and that is why I'm so strongly in opposition to the current leaders in the ANC. The failure of my party, the ANC, is to address this white monopoly capital continuation of the control of the economy in this country.
No,
The ANC has failed to address that, and that is the
democratic
biggest failure of the
to South
ANC
Africans
and the biggest
who don't want
challenge
to
of
live
what we
under
have to
ANC
do.
rule. That is
Yeah.
the great failure of the ANC, is actually bringing freedom to the people of South Africa who don't want this to be a nation. And most people are not au fait with the idea of South Africa being a nation under a colonial
I
contract.
fully dispute that with you.
Well, gentlemen,
The majority of South Africans want to be in a united nation, but they do not want to be under the exploitation of a small group of mainly white men linked to imperialist powers such as the United Kingdom
South
and the United
Africans,
States
Carl,
of America.
come on, that's public up. South Africans do not want to be under the rulership of a government that's led by Black men and women that steals, that has no respect, that keeps sending public money to Cuba, that appoints people who are discredited into important positions of power. The national government, the assembly, is filled with people who should be in prison. That's what South Africans don't want.
No.
The fear of white people
South
is not the
Africans
biggest
do
thing.
want a united South Africa. South Africans do want to be ruled by the majority of people in this country and representatives of that majority. I agree with you. South Africans do not want to be ruled by crooks and mafia-style bosses, and Cyril Ramaphosa is the worst example of that. And that is one of the reasons why we're insisting that he must go.
Okay.
Can you just jump in?
Wait. Can you just finish this round? And I want to go back to the royal family, please. Well, Carl and then Roman. Phil, sorry.
Yeah. All I want to say is, look, decolonization is self-determination. Self-determination is decolonization. Why does your government support support self-determination for the Palestinians, self-determination for the Western Saharans, self-determination for the South Sudanese, but then you don't support self-determination for the people of the Western Cape? I mean, it's completely hypocritical.
Who are those people of the Western Cape who want self-determination? A couple of whites.
Well, no, not ironically.
I can assure you that the majority of people who live in the Western Cape want to be part of a united South Africa.
Well, let's have. We're calling for a referendum.
Self-determination by whites that you want.
Well, that's not the facts, and that's the thing. But a referendum will tell us that, and I'm happy to be wrong. But you're the one that we're too scared to have that referendum. Not
Phil, has there ever been a formal request for a referendum in that regard, and that has been declined, or is it just I've seen surveys, I've seen individuals sharing their views, but I have not seen anything that is a formal request to the national government of South Africa for that.
Are we going to talk about the royal family or this harebrained scheme of referendums for self-determination?
Carl, please, let's deal with one particular question. And has there been any formal request for such?
Yes, there has. I personally have written the letter and delivered it to the presidency at Parliament and got a letter of receipt. I've also delivered it to the Premier, and the DA have agreed to bring the referendum legislation, which they've published in the Government Gazette, but it hasn't been tabled in Parliament. Apparently, it's imminent, and they've promised that they'll call a referendum which includes a question on Cape independence, and then the people of the Western Cape decide for themselves. And self-determination should mean that we all agree to abide by the outcome, and I'm very happy to abide by the wishes of the West. And if Carl is correct, and this is just a bunch of white people, then he's got nothing to worry about, because only 13% of the Western Cape population is white, and they couldn't possibly deliver 50+1% of the vote in a referendum. And actually, if he's wrong, and actually the majority of people in the Western Cape do want self-determination and independence, then actually what applies for the Palestinians and the Western Saharans and the South Sudanese and everybody and all of the countries that want decolonization should also apply to the people of the Western Cape.
Okay, thank you. Roman, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just one thing. Carl, you defined South Africans as not wanting to live under one party of crooks and mafias who sell out to Western interests. You described Cyril Ramaphosa as the sell out to Western interests. The ANC is a party of crooks and mafias, thanks to the Zondo report. And if you are conceding that is exactly what they are, the difference between them and Queen Elizabeth's colonial era, even though it happened before her, are not at all dissimilar. So I think on one hand, we can say quite correctly, perhaps, that colonialism was bad, but we then cannot say that what is happening today is completely different from what happened in the past. To me, it is a strange and continuous cycle of things just being there under a new form of colonialism perpetuated by the ANC.
Well, Roman, I think you deliberately misconstrue what I'm saying. Because the reality is not that I'm saying the ANC is, as a structure, as a political organization, a party of thieves and of crooks. Cyril Ramaphosa decided to call the ANC accused number one in the dock of corruption, while he, as a person, as an individual, should be accused number one. The ANC as a political organization is not a representation of corruption and of a mafia government. There are individuals in the African National Congress who fail the ANC, who are corrupt, who have to be rooted out. And that is the difference. The fact that you and Cyril Ramaphosa seem to conflate these issues and call it the same just puts him and you in the same group. But the reality is that the vast majority of members of the African National Congress, the rank and file grassroots members of the ANC, are people who want to see true liberation in this country, who want to see economic empowerment, and who want to see an end to corruption. And that is the challenge that we have, and that is what I'm fighting for, and many other members of the African National Congress are fighting for. And that is why we're so unequivocal in our demand that Cyril Ramaphosa and the gang that he has surrounded himself with in the National Executive Committee of the ANC, through having bought their places at the 54th National Conference of the ANC in 2017, has to go.
So you would prefer...
But that does not mean the ANC as an organization is corrupt.
Carl, you would prefer Nkosi Dlamini Zuma, right? But anyway, forget it. Would you not say of the British people...
I don't allow people to put words in my mouth.
Okay.
I have not expressed a preference for any candidate for the upcoming elections of the 55th National Conference.
Okay.
I've expressed a rejection of Cyril Ramaphosa and his corrupt gang. Those
Okay.
are two different
Okay,
things.
that's
Thank
fine.
you.
Let's move on to the point you made earlier about the ANC, the vast majority of South Africans and ANC. Would you not say the same thing about the vast majority of British people or the royal family? Because you seem to paint them all with the same brush, that they are racist. I mean, the leaders of the ANC, Tambo and his family, the Mbekis, others lived in the United Kingdom when they were running away from apartheid in South Africa. How would you run into the lion's nest if you know that's the lion that's responsible for your flight in the first place? Did they feel threatened while they were living in the UK all the time, having lavish lives protected by the British people, funded by the British people? I don't understand.
Solly, first of all, I don't know that Comrade Oliver Tambo and the rest of the ANC leadership who lived very humble and simple lives in the United Kingdom were funded by the British government. They were not. And most certainly one of the great heroes of four, Margaret Thatcher, would not have given a cent to them. I have never said in this debate that the whole British nation are racist. I expressed a particular view which is backed up by historical facts about the government of Britain and the way in which it is personified by the British royal family as being exploitative, as being repressive, and as being racist. And history says very clearly that that is a fact. It is not just a conjecture. It is not a figment of my imagination. It is a reality which, when you listen to the people of Kenya, I recently listened to one of the representatives of a family that deeply suffered under British colonial rule. And I'm sure that that family will say to you, yes, this government and their representatives, including their Queen and the British royal family, are racist. They have inflicted severe suffering on us, and there should be restitution. One of the issues that we ought to have discussed in this debate, which we haven't yet, is the issue of restitution. And how do we actually address the fact that so much have been stolen from colonies such as South Africa, and how what has been stolen is returned without compensation? Because remember, Solly, you don't pay.
We don't have a lot of time.
Stolen goods.
I know where you're going in the discussion. It's out there, but we're discussing the Queen, who is just died.
Yes,
now,
and the
I would
Queen
like
was
to ask
part
you,
of the themes, and therefore restitution is part of the subject of discussion.
Well, I'm the host of the discussion, if you let me, please.
That's good. Right. Please proceed.
My question to you is this: the Queen Elizabeth II has passed. Nothing except that she's going to be replaced by her son, now King Charles III, will change. All right. So what would you say? Maybe let's start with you, Carl, very quickly. If you were to have an audience with King Charles III, what would you say to him?
I will say to King Charles, the most important thing that you have to do as the new king is to make sure that there's restitution of the thievery that took place from the colonies, that the money, the gold, the diamonds, all the resources that you've taken from those colonies have to be returned, and that you have to issue an unequivocal apology for what had been done under colonialism, and make sure that there is, in fact, with that apology, because apologies are empty words as long as it is not accompanied by restitution, the return of those stolen goods to those colonies in order to help to empower those countries truly to gain control of their economies and be in charge of their own destiny. That's the message I will give to King Charles.
Well, I would say to you that you can return all the wealth and the gold to Africa as long as Africa is run by thieves, that the people of Africa are not going to see the benefit of that wealth. That's the truth.
Well, hopefully when that happens,
we all talk about returning this to a cabal of criminals who are going to take the people of Africa. Don't benefit from anything.
Well, then empower the people in Africa to remove the thieves, as we are trying to do right here in South Africa with the thief from Pala Pala.
Okay. Phil, Roman, what would you say to King Charles III if you were to meet him tomorrow?
I would implore him to learn from the example of his mother. It's interesting. Obviously, he's waited a long time for this role, and you hope that he's prepared. Some of the criticisms around Charles has been that he's been much more outspoken on issues that perhaps are unhelpful. Some positive, some negative. Where the Queen largely kept her views to herself, and would engage whatever their views were privately. But I hope he's clearly had a long time waiting in the wings, and I hope he's as great a monarch as his mother, and I'm sure he'll aspire to be. It's a tough job. Let anybody not think. For anybody who thinks that the monarchy is some high life, you start to look at the schedule. I think I saw something that the Queen in her 90s or certainly late 80s was still conducting something like 320 official functions per year, and was on the board of it's extraordinarily hard work. That's the reality, and it's a life of service and not really it seems silly to say not a life of privilege. I mean, clearly she lives in it, but she was a servant of the British people, and I'm sure Charles will be the same, and I would implore him to be so.
Would he be open to a conversation about restitution? I mean, suppose we all agreed what that means.
Yeah, look, I think Charles has always been very, very progressive. I clearly don't know the man. I think turning back history is always a very, very difficult situation, because at some point you have to put an arbitrary date on what happens, and invariably you just create more problems. And I could use, for example, I think we all agree, for example, that the 1913 Land Act and the land restitution process and association that is healthy, and I think it's sensible, and I'm glad we have that. But then you have this scenario where we have the mass illegal settlement of land now, where the current today, the government can do nothing about it. So we have this scenario where we're having mass swathes of land illegally settled now, and the government does nothing, and we're returning land correctly that was done 100 years ago, and we always end up with these anomalies. And I think actually the reality is the two different things. I think Charles clearly for the bad aspects of colonialism, I think the British government has and should recognise that it wasn't perfect. The other side of that coin is that countries like South Africa should also recognise that it wasn't all bad, and there were some benefits, and we should have a nuanced approach to that. And I think both sides have to be sensible, and I think it's ridiculous for one side to demand the other there. But I think there are these are topics that do have to be discussed, and I think Charles would be open to that, and rightly so, if it was sensible. Look, from what I've heard today, with the greatest respect, Carl, it's not going to be sensible if you're the one that's having the discussion, but perhaps there are other people that would be able to have that more mature.
We're very sensible and correct.
Okay, maybe Roman would have a more sensible conversation with King Charles III. Roman?
I don't have much to say to him, to be honest. I think he has good instincts in terms of conservation and beauty and metaphysics in general, but I'm afraid, as I alluded to earlier in this conversation, the monarchy lacks anything substantial other than dignity and duty, which are important things. Don't get me wrong, which are important things. But the inevitable slide of Britain to an economic hub for technocrats will continue unabated, and he is unable to change that, even if he wanted to.
But the British royal family is a huge tourist attraction, isn't it? I mean, millions and millions of people travel there to see the palaces, the change of guard. They spend a lot of money there. Yeah. It contributes massively.
I mean, but that's the essential problem, right? It's like the Catholic Church, right? It's a trinket. You get married in a building called a church, and you do your vows, and there you go. Where's the substance? Like the royal family is like the Kim Kardashian of Great Britain, right? They're popular, everyone knows them, but what do they actually do?
Okay, look,
and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, Charles is 75 years old. He's waited. Everyone says it's all in all international media, all his life preparing himself for this day. But he's 75 years old. He's not going to live on that throne for as long as his mother did. My sense is that he would start as soon as possible to prepare his son William to take over at some point. How do you see that happening? Do you see him being open to that? Or is he like for the first 2-3, because he could live for another 25 years, going by the genes in his family, he could live well for another 25 years. Do you
I
think
don't care too much.
focusing
as long
on
as Meghan
himself?
Markle is nowhere near Buckingham Palace in her lifetime, I'm happy with that, whatever else happens.
Why? Okay, Carl, why did you like Meg? Actually, I think she brings some spice
I
to
think
the
she's
family.
a wonderful American celebrity, and she should stay there.
But she's married, and she now is the mother of the grandchildren of Charles the King.
No, very good. And they decided to leave, and that's their right to do so. And they should remain in America and go on Oprah and sell podcasts to Spotify.
Okay.
Perfect.
So
Stay
we
away
don't
from the royal
hear
family.
we don't hear, and Prince William has been almost like exemplary from his childhood. He's never been photographed with naked or to get drunk or dating this girl, doing all sorts of scandalous things, which would be fine for a teenager, really. Do you see him as an amazing monarch in the future, continuing on the footsteps of his grandmother who's just passed?
So are you talking to me? Sorry, Sally.
To all of you, yeah, anyone can go.
Yeah, I think once again, the monarch, whoever stays there, duty and diligence is important. But essentially, if you have no power, you can't change anything. So irrespective of who's there, it doesn't
It's
matter.
what it is. Right, Carl?
Well, Solly, I really don't have any opinion about William. Prince Charles, I don't think, or King Charles, I don't think we're going to see much from him. I doubt whether he's going to change anything. What I can say is what we have learned about the royal family from inside their own circles is what we heard from Harry, and that is not good.
Okay. Phil?
Yeah, look, I don't follow the sort of too closely. My certainly in terms of William, he seems to have made a good impression. He seems to be liked. His wife seems to be well respected, and I think he's sort of that quiet dignity perhaps he has inherited from his grandmother. I'd never really thought in terms of the next succession, but I think probably that would be sensible, and I think it's a good point you raise, because I think probably that would be a key thing for Charles to do. I think William, as you say, is likely to be a much longer reigning monarch. And I think it's going to be it's going to be an interesting time. The passing of an era. Who knows what's going to happen with the monarchy now? And I think the monarchy. Obviously, I disagree with Roman over what the ideal circumstances is, and I would say that your point about the monarchy being a tourist attraction is also true. They're a net contributor to the British fiscus, but they. The reality is the monarchy is exactly what the British people want, and it'll continue to be exactly what the British people want. And in actual fact, the way that Charles conducts himself will probably determine whether the monarchy continues or not. It's a fairly close run thing. It's not whilst the admiration for the Queen is high. I think it's probably in the 50s. I think from memory of research of people who want the monarchy to remain. So a terrible monarch would very quickly turn support for the monarchy into opposition for the monarchy, and at that point, then it would end. So look, who knows? I hope that we can continue with this tradition for a long period of time to come, and I'm sure that Charles will be sensitive to that, and William after him, because I'm definitely a royalist, but a ceremonial royalist. That's how I want my royals. Okay,
two things. We have a few minutes to go. Now, the passing of Queen Elizabeth II has created vast opportunities across the world, including this one, for people to vent. For people to say, we liked her because of this, we didn't like her because of this, and also issues about colonialism and how the Commonwealth functions and all that. We know that. Do you think at some point Charles should stop and say, we've heard you, the people of the world, as it were, we've heard you, we've heard what you're not happy with, this is where we stand, or must it just quietly listen and not do it? Because he would be aware that some people are really saying, yeah, I'm happy this lady has died and this is what they did to us. That's the one thing. The other thing is Africa needs to probably unite. I don't know what that means, to unite and have a voice. Africa is too splintered. Africa needs to say, okay, now, is there an opportunity for us to insist on a different relationship with the UK? But it was going to have the different relationships with all the powers, China, Russia, who seem to be having a sway over which way Africa goes. So isn't Africa also needing to take responsibility about how it responds to, how it relates to foreign powers?
I would agree with you, Solly. Yes, I agree with you that Africa has to unite. that we have to reformulate our stance with regards to the Western powers, to the United States and its surrogate Britain, that we have to stand up against those powers.
Not China and Russia? Not China and Russia?
Of course, all of those powers, we have to make sure that we become stronger in our self-determination and determining the interests of our people. That is of absolute critical importance. If you ask me what I would like Prince Charles or King Charles to do, and in fact, I already said I don't think he's going to do so, is to be open to say, I hear what you are saying, I'm going to institute restitution, and I'm going to act in a way that allows this strangle grip that the big economic powers have over the futures of the people of Africa to come to an end. But I fear that if he ever tries to do that, that will be the end of him, and that will be the end of the British royal family, because they have become an instrument for the continuation of exploitation, and those who benefit from the kind of justification and legitimization that they give to that process will get rid of it.
Okay, Carl and Roman, your views on Africa and how Charles should summarize current events.
Right. So just on the first point about Charles maybe having a conversation about restitution, I think it's a no-go because no one really wants it. No one cares. There's a few activists every now and again, but Africa and the young population...
I can assure you the people of Africa want restitution.
Carl, please.
Yeah. So the people of
I'm just
Africa
making
are not...
my point.
No, fair enough. The people of Africa are not terribly interested in the past. It's a young population, very interested in the future. And I think if Charles can have a role in that, I'm sure that it could be positive, but African leaders, by and large, tend not to care too much about their populations, which is an unfortunate circumstance we find ourselves in. As for Africa, it will continue to be exploited by West and East and whoever else if there is no philosophical foundations to what it is, right? And I think the biggest failure of decolonization is trying to find that African identity. What does it mean to be an African? Europeans know what it means to be European. Australians know. Asians, to some extent, know what it means to be Asian. What does it mean to be African? No one knows. No one has even attempted. Oh, there's been a few attempts, but it's not going anywhere.
I disagree. A white man cannot come and tell Africans here what they should know or not know, or whether they should know their identity. That's very presumptuous, Roman. Terribly so.
Well, I'm not white. I'm half Arab. And secondly, I didn't say what their identity is. I said they need to find it, and they need to stand by it, and they need to use it to make themselves better. But for now,
then don't say that people don't know what their identity is. They do.
Carl, I thought you were African.
Carl,
I thought you were African. Are you not African?
I'm African, yes.
Oh, okay.
And I've just said that it is presumptuous.
Into it?
I did bring the matter of skin color into it because it is relevant. I, as an African who happen to be white, also have to be careful about how I articulate myself, because I must be clear that there are certain experiences of Black Africans that I have not had because I've been at the receiving end in a benefit way of the system of apartheid racism. And I'm always sensitive to that. And that was the sensitivity that I was raising here now too. So
I as an African who happens to be Black, also have to be careful how I say a lot of things these days, Carl. I'm just an African who happens to be Black, but there are many other Africans who are everything else. North Africa, South Africa, in South Africa, all over the place. So
one last remark. Well, sorry, Carl. One last remark. If we wanted to self-actualize Africa as Africans, right, and I count myself as one because I live here, irrespective of where I come from, the best thing to do is to actually help the groups of Africa self-actualize outside of the national state, not the perpetuity of the British Empire through the Union of South Africa as an example, because those borders were built by people who didn't live here. But if you do manage to say the national government has very little power, but the local has more power, the cultural aspects, the linguistic aspects, the historical aspects, the legal aspects of that particular culture actualize first, then we can build something really great. That would be the way to do it. But for governments in Africa, that is not the way they want to do it. They want to keep it to themselves, just like the colonialists. So nothing much has changed, I'm afraid.
Phil?
Well, we would agree about African unity, Roman. Yes.
So look, coming back to the question, I think I think Charles will, he's not going to call a press conference and start announcing from the balcony at Buckingham Palace his feelings on the subject. That's not his role. I think what you will see is quiet diplomacy as he travels the world and engages people in a more regal fashion. And we must remember that the political authority of the UK is not the monarchy; it's the government. It's the elected government, and actually, any policy changes and any policy decisions from Britain are going to be taken by the government, which obviously now also has a new leader, as opposed to the monarchy.
Right. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been an amazing conversation. You see, we could go on and on and on, but it's a movie that continues to roll on. Charles is going to be queen with the king. We don't know what kind of king, well, he is king already. We don't know what kind of king he's going to be. It seems like there is no much expectation that much will change. The past is the past. Charles doesn't have political power to even make decisions that somebody else must carry out. We know that. But Africa cannot continue to just wait for us to make decisions. Africa needs to unite. And I think I like what Roman said. If we don't know who we are fundamentally, we're not going to be able to take a stance and define our position in the world. I mean, Africa is still defined into Francophone, Anglophone, Lusophone, Hispanophone. When African leaders go to speak at the United Nations, other international forum, they speak in English. When Chinese come, they speak in Chinese. The Americans speak English. The Spanish speak Spanish. So there's a lot of strength that comes with your linguistic idiom that gives you a sense of adulthood when you stand in front of a crowd. But when you have to still try to find the right words to say the things, the right way to put sentences, you're not able to be yourself, to focus on what you really want to say. Maybe Africa has a lot of way to go. But guys, those who are watching this show, if you've come this far, it means you enjoy the conversation. Stay with us. Keep sharing. WorldView. If you want to help us, it's worldview@help.help@gmail.com. And Carl, Roman, Phil, I love you, man. I love you very much. And I love Carl. Sometimes I stop you, but actually I really do like you. Because you say, I like people who say what they think. I don't have to agree with everything you say, but I like the fact that you say what needs to be said. That's great. And people love you for that.
Thank you, Solly. And of course, the past has produced the present and will influence the future.
Indeed, indeed. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Have a lovely day. For me, Solly Mweng at WorldView. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Solly Roman.